She was forced to marry a poor man. Little did they know, he was a billionaire in disguise. Before we begin the story, please leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. In the small, humble village of Everwood, nestled on the edge of a vast, windswept meadow, a storm raged fiercely. The wind howled through the trees, bending their trunks with the force of nature's fury. The clouds, dark and ominous, churned above, as if the heavens themselves were in turmoil. In the midst of this wild storm, an old cottage stood at the outskirts, its timbers creaking under the pressure of the wind. Inside, the air was thick with tension, the kind that only a life-and-death moment can bring. The room was dimly lit by a flickering oil lamp, casting shadows across the worn wooden floors. A midwife, her face lined with age and worry, knelt beside a young woman who lay motionless on a simple straw bed. The baby's cries echoed loudly in the tiny room, each wail a reminder of the life that had just begun and the life that had just ended. The midwife's hands shook as she carefully wiped the newborn's face, her heart heavy with the sorrow of what had just occurred. The young woman, only in her 20s, had passed away from complications during childbirth. Her once vibrant eyes now stared lifelessly at the ceiling, and her body lay still, a tragic testament to the cruelty of fate. "This child has no one," the midwife muttered softly, her voice a mixture of sympathy and resignation. She looked at the small infant, swaddled in tattered cloth, fragile and vulnerable. The storm outside seemed to grow fiercer, as if nature itself was mourning the loss of a mother. The midwife's gaze lingered on the baby for a moment longer, and then, as if a decision had been made, she sighed deeply. With one last glance at the lifeless woman, she rose to her feet and slowly made her way to the door. But before she could step outside, a figure appeared in the doorway, casting a long shadow across the room. It was Mrs. Grace, the matriarch of the village, known for her calm demeanor and strong-willed personality. She had always been a woman of action, one who took charge when others hesitated. Her presence in the doorway was like a beam of light, cutting through the darkness. "Give me the child," Mrs. Grace said, her voice firm but gentle, like the wind before a storm. The midwife hesitated for a moment, her eyes flickering toward the young woman on the bed. "But Mrs. Grace, you already have a daughter, Lily," the midwife said quietly. "Another mouth to feed, and you are not a young woman anymore. Raising a child, it's a heavy burden." Mrs. Grace's gaze softened, but there was no hesitation in her eyes. "Give me the child," she repeated, her tone leaving no room for argument. There was something in her voice, a quiet but unwavering resolve, that the midwife could not deny. With a deep sigh, the midwife relented. She carefully handed the fragile baby to Mrs. Grace, who cradled the child in her arms with surprising tenderness. The warmth of the tiny body against her chest was a stark contrast to the cold storm that raged outside. And for a moment, Mrs. Grace felt a strange connection to the child. Little did she know, this small, helpless baby, whose life began in such sorrow, would become the catalyst for one of the greatest emotional upheavals of her life. Mrs. Grace named the baby Ava, after a beloved aunt who had passed away years ago. It was a name that carried with it a sense of hope, a quiet promise that despite the tragic circumstances of her birth, Ava's life would be one of purpose and meaning. Ava grew up thinking that Mrs. Grace was her real mother. She was raised in the same small cottage, surrounded by the warmth of the hearth, the scent of baking bread, and the soft hum of Mrs. Grace's soothing voice. Ava's adoptive sister, Lily, was only a few years older, and the two girls spent their childhood playing in the fields, running through the tall grass and chasing the butterflies that danced in the sun. Ava, with her dark skin, bright eyes, and long, thick hair, was a striking child. People in the village often commented on her beauty, her radiance that seemed to outshine the warmth of the sun itself. But Lily, though sweet and kind, struggled to capture the same kind of attention. Where Ava's beauty was undeniable, Lily's quiet demeanor made her seem almost invisible in comparison. As they grew older, Ava's beauty became even more pronounced. The boys in the village began to take notice, their eyes lingering on her whenever she passed by. Even the wealthiest merchant's son, William, who had always been the subject of Lily's unspoken affections, seemed to be entranced by Ava. This attention didn't go unnoticed by Lily, and with each passing day, her jealousy began to grow. It wasn't long before Ava could sense the shift in her sister's behavior. Where once they had been inseparable, now there was distance between them, an invisible wall that Ava couldn't quite understand. Lily no longer smiled at her as she had when they were children, and her words, once kind and gentle, began to feel like daggers. Ava's heart ached, not knowing why her sister had grown so distant. One evening, as Ava finished washing the laundry by the river, she overheard a conversation between Mrs. Grace and Lily. Hidden behind the thick trunks of the trees, Ava held her breath, straining to hear the words. "She's not even your real daughter," Lily's voice hissed in the dim light of the kitchen. Ava's heart stopped. "She's adopted, isn't she?" Lily continued. "That's why she looks so different. She doesn't belong here, Mama. She's just a burden." Ava's hands trembled, her heart shattered into a million pieces. The woman she had always known as her mother, her only mother, had never wanted her. She was nothing more than an afterthought, a charity, an obligation. Mrs. Grace's voice came through, soft yet heavy with regret. "You're right, Lily. She was never mine. I should have left her that night." Ava felt the world crumble around her. All her life she had been loved by Mrs. Grace, had been cared for, held close in times of fear. But now, in one cruel moment, she realized the truth. She was nothing to Mrs. Grace. And worse, she was nothing to Lily. From that day on, Ava's life at Mrs. Grace's cottage changed. The warmth she once felt in her heart began to fade. Mrs. Grace no longer treated her as a daughter, but as a servant. Ava did the laundry, swept the floors, and cooked the meals while Lily continued to live her carefree life, unburdened by the hard work that Ava had come to know all too well. The food that once filled the table now seemed scarce. Ava ate the leftovers while Lily feasted on fresh bread, hearty stews, and sweet pies. But despite the hunger gnawing at her, Ava did not complain. She couldn't. And then one day, Mrs. Grace gave her an order that would change the course of Ava's life forever. "You're getting married," Mrs. Grace announced, her voice cold and distant. Ava's heart raced. "Married to who?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "To Marcus," Mrs. Grace replied, her eyes avoiding Ava's gaze. Marcus was a poor fisherman, crippled by a childhood accident, and everyone in the village mocked him. They called him a beggar, a useless man who could never amount to anything. His hut, a small, crumbling structure by the river, was barely fit for habitation. The villagers whispered cruel things about him behind his back, and yet Mrs. Grace was sending Ava to marry him. Ava's mind raced as Mrs. Grace's words sunk in. "Please, Mama," Ava pleaded. "Please don't make me marry him." But Mrs. Grace grabbed her by the arm, her grip tightening like a vice. "Don't call me that," she snapped. "I should have thrown you away years ago. You're nothing to me now. You will marry Marcus and leave this house. Do you understand?" Ava swallowed the lump in her throat. She had no choice. And so, the next day, with no wedding dress, no celebration, and no family to support her, Ava was married off to Marcus. The village looked on with pity, some with cruel smiles on their faces, others whispering behind their hands. They believed that Ava's life would be nothing more than a struggle in a small, dilapidated hut by the river. But what they didn't know was that Marcus was no poor fisherman. He was a man of great wealth and power, hidden away, not wanting to show the world who he truly was. Ava had no idea what was in store for her. Her heart ached as she followed Marcus to his home, a place where she believed she would live in squalor. She walked behind him, her heart heavy with sorrow, wondering how her life had come to this point. Little did she know, her story was just beginning. As Ava walked behind Marcus toward his humble home, the weight of her situation pressed down on her chest, a feeling she couldn't shake. The village was behind her now, its whispers fading into the distance, but the sting of their judgment remained. She could hear the cruel laughter of the villagers in her mind, echoing like a haunting refrain. Look at her now, the rich man's daughter, reduced to the poor fisherman's wife. Marcus, walking ahead of her, seemed unaffected by the whispers, his back straight, his pace steady. But Ava could not silence the voices in her head. She thought of Mrs. Grace, who had cast her aside like a broken doll, and of Lily, who had once been her sister but was now a stranger, her jealousy growing each day. In those first few days in Marcus's small, worn hut, Ava's life became a blur of exhaustion and despair. The hut was nothing like she had imagined it, small, with a leaking roof and cracked wooden beams. The scent of damp wood mixed with the faint odor of fish, and the air inside was stale. It was so different from the cozy cottage she had once called home, where the fire crackled on cold nights, and the smell of fresh bread filled the air. Yet despite the conditions, Marcus did not speak a word of complaint. He didn't scold her for the mess the hut had become, nor did he seem bothered by the fact that the place was in constant need of repairs. Instead, he simply went about his day, doing his own tasks, with a quiet resolve that Ava had never seen before in any man, especially not someone like him. Each morning, Ava would wake up to find Marcus already gone, off to the river to fish or tend to his small garden. He would return in the evening, always bringing back enough food for the two of them. There was never much, just simple fare, fish, rice, and whatever fruits or vegetables Marcus could find. Yet despite the scarcity, he always seemed content. He never demanded anything from her, never raised his voice or expressed frustration. He simply lived in the moment, as if the troubles of the world did not touch him. One afternoon, as Ava was returning from the village market, struggling to carry a heavy basket of yams, she tripped, and the contents of the basket spilled across the dirt road. The women gathered nearby, their eyes laughing at her misfortune. "She's still useless, even as a poor man's wife," one woman whispered, shaking her head. Ava's face burned with embarrassment. She bent down to collect the yams, trying to ignore the cruel comments from the crowd. But just as she was about to finish, a hand reached out to help her. She looked up in surprise, expecting it to be one of the villagers, perhaps a young boy eager to mock her. But it was Marcus. His face was calm, his eyes kind as he silently picked up the yams and placed them back into her basket. "You don't have to carry everything alone," Marcus said quietly, his voice soft but firm. There was no sarcasm in his tone, no judgment, just a simple, genuine offer of help. For a moment, Ava stood still, stunned by his kindness. No one had ever offered her help without expecting something in return. The villagers had always seen her as a burden, and even Mrs. Grace had treated her like an afterthought. But Marcus, this poor man whom she had been forced to marry, had shown her more kindness than anyone in her life. As the days passed, Ava began to notice more small gestures of kindness. After a long day of work, Marcus would often surprise her with a simple meal, sharing what little they had between them. It wasn't much, but it was more than she had ever received from her adoptive family. One evening, as Ava sat alone outside the hut, her stomach growling with hunger, Marcus returned with a small bowl of boiled yam and palm oil. He didn't sit down to eat with her, though. Instead, he simply placed the bowl beside her and walked off to tend to his fishing gear. Ava stared at the food, the warmth of it tempting her. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the smell of the simple meal reached her. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the bowl. "What about you?" she called to him. Marcus paused, glancing back at her over his shoulder. "I've already eaten," he said casually. But Ava noticed something that made her heart twist. There was no second plate for him. He had given her the only food in the house. Tears pricked at Ava's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. How could she have been so blind to his kindness before? She had spent so much time resenting him, assuming he was just another poor, unfortunate man. But Marcus was more than that. He was a man who had been stripped of everything: his wealth, his dignity, his health. And yet he still found the strength to care for others. As Ava ate the meal, every bite seemed to fill not just her stomach, but the emptiness that had lived in her heart for so long. She felt a warmth that she hadn't known in years. And for the first time since arriving in the hut, she didn't feel completely alone. Days turned into weeks, and Ava began to settle into her new life with Marcus. They spoke little, but the quiet companionship between them was enough. They worked together side by side, and Ava found herself slowly accepting her circumstances. While it wasn't the life she had envisioned for herself, it was better than the one she had left behind. One day, as Ava was fetching water from the river, she overheard a conversation between two of the village women. "Did you hear?" one woman said, her voice filled with excitement. "Marcus isn't poor. I saw him buying fresh bread and palm wine yesterday. Where did he get that kind of money?" Ava's heart skipped a beat. Could it be true? Was Marcus really as poor as everyone thought? Or was he hiding something? Something more than she had ever imagined? She rushed back to the hut, her mind racing with questions. Marcus was sitting on the porch, sharpening a knife, the same peaceful look on his face that he always wore. Ava approached him cautiously, her voice shaking slightly as she asked, "Marcus, where did you get the food yesterday?" He looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "Does it matter?" he asked. Ava felt a pang of frustration. She needed to know the truth. "Yes, it does," she replied. "People are talking. They think you've stolen something." Marcus chuckled softly, as if the idea of him stealing anything was absurd. "Let them think what they want," he said with a shrug. But Ava wasn't convinced. Something about Marcus felt different. There was more to him than met the eye. She could feel it in the way he moved, the way he carried himself. There was a strength, a quiet power behind his humble exterior that made Ava question everything she thought she knew about him. The following evening, as Ava sat alone on the porch, Marcus returned from the market with more food than usual. He placed a small wooden basket in front of her, filled with fresh bread, roasted fish, and a bottle of palm wine. Ava's eyes widened. "Where did this come from?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He simply sat beside her and watched the sunset. After a long pause, he turned to her and said, "I used to be wealthy, Ava. I had everything: money, a family, servants. But when I lost my ability to walk properly, my family cast me aside. They sent me away like I was nothing. I had to start over, live a life of struggle. But it taught me something important." Ava's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" "I learned that poverty doesn't make a person less worthy," Marcus said, his voice soft but filled with conviction. "But the world will treat you like it does." Ava sat in stunned silence. All these months, she had seen Marcus as just a poor fisherman, someone who had nothing to offer. But now, she saw him in a new light. He had suffered in ways she could not imagine, and yet he remained kind, generous, and strong. In that moment, Ava realized that Marcus was not the man the village had painted him to be. He was more than just a poor, crippled fisherman. He was a man with a story, a man who understood pain and loss in ways that few could comprehend. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ava felt something shift inside her. She wasn't sure what it was. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was the beginnings of something much deeper. But one thing was certain. Marcus had changed her perception of life, and perhaps for the first time, she was beginning to see him for who he truly was. The days continued to pass quietly in the small hut by the river. The sun would rise each morning, casting its golden light over the simple life Ava was slowly beginning to accept. There was something unexpectedly calming about her new existence, despite the hardships. Marcus's presence, steady and unwavering, had become her anchor. She was learning that not all love had to come in grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Sometimes love came in small acts of kindness, helping someone pick up a basket of spilled yams, offering a meal without expecting anything in return, and providing a safe space to heal. But even as Ava grew accustomed to Marcus's gentle nature, there was still a nagging question she couldn't shake. Who was he really? What had happened to him? Where had all his wealth gone? And why, after all the suffering he'd endured, did he choose this humble life? She had heard the village rumors, whispers of Marcus's mysterious past, stories of how he once lived in a grand house, the son of a wealthy merchant. But those stories seemed too far-fetched, too impossible to believe. It wasn't until the day Marcus told her the truth that Ava understood how much she had underestimated him. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Marcus returned to the hut with more food than usual. Ava sat by the fire, her fingers absent-mindedly weaving a piece of cloth into a small mat. She looked up as Marcus entered, his presence filling the small space. He smiled, but there was something different in his eyes, a kind of quiet intensity that Ava hadn't noticed before. "I have something to tell you," Marcus said, setting the basket down on the table. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, as if he had been carrying a weight for far too long. Ava's heart skipped a beat. She set down her weaving and stood up, the air between them charged with an unspoken tension. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair before turning to face her. "Ava, I want to be honest with you," he said. "You've been asking questions I've been avoiding, about my past, about who I really am." Ava's heart raced. She had been waiting for this moment for weeks, and yet, when it arrived, she wasn't sure she was ready. "I don't need to know everything," she said softly, "but I don't want to be in the dark anymore. I want to understand. Why did you choose this life? Why live in this tiny hut when you could have everything?" Marcus was quiet for a long time, his gaze fixed on the floor. Then he spoke, his voice low, like a confession. "I wasn't always this way," he began. "Once, I had it all. A family, wealth, power. I was the son of a successful merchant. We lived in a mansion, and I had everything a man could want. But when I was young, I made a mistake. I took my life for granted. I thought that money and status were everything. I thought that people loved me for who I was, not for what I had." Ava listened intently, her eyes never leaving Marcus as he spoke. She had no idea that the man standing before her, the quiet fisherman, had once been someone so different. "When I was in my 20s, I had an accident," Marcus continued. A fall, a simple mistake, and I lost the ability to walk properly. Suddenly I was worthless in the eyes of my family. My father, my mother, everyone turned their backs on me. I became a burden to them. I had no choice but to leave. I had to start over, live a life of humility and hard work. Ava's breath caught in her throat. She had always assumed that Marcus had chosen this life out of some sense of defeat, but now she realized how much he had lost. "Do you think I chose to live this way?" Marcus asked, his voice raw with emotion. "Do you think I wanted to be a poor fisherman, struggling every day to make ends meet?" "No," But I chose to live honestly. I chose to live with integrity. I didn't want to be a part of that world of false love, of people who only cared about my wealth. I wanted to know who would truly love me for who I am. Ava stood in stunned silence, her heart breaking for Marcus. She had thought him weak, a man resigned to a life of poverty. But now, she saw the truth. He had been forced into this life, and yet he had embraced it, not as a punishment, but as a way to reclaim his dignity. As the evening wore on, Ava and Marcus sat by the fire, the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls of the small hut. Ava's mind was racing with the revelation she had just heard. Marcus had suffered more than she could ever imagine, and yet, through all the pain and loss, he had become a man of strength, of kindness, and of deep moral character. He had chosen to live simply, not because he had no other choice, but because he refused to let his circumstances define him. Ava looked at him, her eyes softening with understanding. "I had no idea," she whispered. "I thought you were just a man who had given up." Marcus smiled faintly, but there was no bitterness in his eyes, only quiet wisdom. Sometimes life forces us to face things we're not ready for, but those things, those hardships, they shape us into who we are meant to be. Ava reached out and took his hand, her fingers trembling. In that moment, she understood Marcus in a way she never had before. He wasn't just the man she had been forced to marry. He was someone who had fought for his own survival, someone who had been tested by life and had emerged stronger because of it. "Thank you for trusting me with your story," Ava said softly. "I know it must have been hard to share." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "It wasn't easy," he admitted. "But I trust you, Ava. And I want you to know that I never wanted to deceive you. I just wanted you to see me as I am. Not as the man you thought I was, but as the man I've become." Ava nodded, a sense of peace settling over her. For the first time since her life had been turned upside down, she felt truly at peace. She had come to Marcus's home thinking it was a place of misery, but now it felt like a sanctuary. She no longer saw the small hut as a symbol of defeat, but as a place of healing, a place where love, even in its simplest form, could grow. The days that followed were filled with a new sense of closeness between Ava and Marcus. Their conversations became deeper, more meaningful, as they shared their hopes, their fears, and the dreams they had once kept hidden. Ava found herself laughing more, her heart lighter than it had been in years. And with each passing day, she realized that the life she had feared, the life she had thought would be her prison, was actually a new beginning. It wasn't just Marcus's kindness that had transformed her. It was the way he had taught her to see the world differently, to look beyond the surface, beyond the judgments of others, and to see the strength in what truly mattered. Love, loyalty, and the courage to stand up for who you are. And so, Ava and Marcus continued to build their life together, side by side, in the small hut by the river. Though their journey had been one of struggle and sacrifice, they had found something that neither wealth nor status could provide: true companionship, and the knowledge that they were enough, just as they were. As the days passed in their humble home by the river, Ava and Marcus's relationship deepened in ways neither of them had expected. The small hut, once a symbol of despair, began to feel more like a sanctuary, a place of solace where they could heal and grow together. Ava had come to understand Marcus in ways no one else had, and he, in turn, had come to see her as more than the girl he had been forced to marry. Each morning, as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Ava would rise early, preparing simple meals, gathering water from the river, and tending to the small garden Marcus had started near the back of the hut. It was hard work, but it was also a life she was beginning to appreciate. She no longer felt the sting of being treated as an outsider, a burden in the house of Mrs. Grace. Instead, she found satisfaction in the routine, the small victories of each day, the quiet moments of connection with Marcus. But even in the peaceful rhythm of their days, Ava couldn't completely escape the weight of her past. The memories of her life with Mrs. Grace and Lily were never far from her mind. She could still hear the cruel words that had been spoken, still feel the sting of rejection, and the hollow ache that had filled her heart for so long. She had tried to bury those memories, to push them aside, but they lingered, like shadows that refused to fade. One morning, as Ava was walking to the market to trade some of the vegetables from their garden, she overheard a conversation between two of the village women. They were standing outside the bakery, gossiping as women in small towns often do. Ava tried to ignore them, but their words cut through the air, reaching her ears like a sharp blade. "I heard she married that poor fisherman," one woman said, her voice filled with disbelief. "The rich merchant's daughter, married to someone like him. It's laughable." "Can you believe it?" the other woman replied. "I never would have thought she'd end up like this. She was supposed to have a life of luxury, not to live in some shack by the river." Ava's heart tightened in her chest as she walked past them, her face burning with embarrassment. She had always known that the villagers talked about her, that they saw her as a tragedy, a fallen girl who had been abandoned by her own family. But now, she realized that their judgments went beyond pity. They mocked her, saw her as a joke, a symbol of failure. She quickened her pace, desperate to leave the gossip behind, but the words lingered in her mind. The rich merchant's daughter, married to someone like him. She had once been the girl everyone envied, the girl with a future laid out before her. Now she was nothing but a shadow of that person, reduced to the wife of a poor fisherman. The shame that had once been buried deep inside her began to resurface. When Ava returned to the hut, Marcus was sitting by the fire, sharpening a knife. He looked up as she entered, his face softening when he saw the troubled expression on her face. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice gentle. Ava hesitated, her eyes darting away from him. She didn't want to burden him with her thoughts. She had always prided herself on being strong, on holding her emotions in check. But in that moment, she couldn't stop the flood of feelings that threatened to spill over. "Nothing," she muttered, shrugging off the weight of the conversation she had overheard. "Just a bad day at the market." Marcus didn't press her. He could tell that something was bothering her, but he respected her space. Instead, he stood up, walked over to the window and stared out at the river. There was a long silence between them before he finally spoke. "I don't want you to feel like you're alone, Ava," he said quietly, his back to her. "I know the villagers talk about us. I've heard their whispers, their laughter, but none of that matters. What matters is what we've built here. What matters is you and me." Ava swallowed hard. She knew Marcus was trying to reassure her, but his words felt hollow in the face of the cruel reality she had just faced. She wasn't sure she could escape the judgments of the village or the burden of her past. "Do you ever wonder, Marcus," she said softly, "what life would have been like if I had married someone else? Someone more suitable?" Marcus turned to face her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he said nothing, but then he walked toward her, his steps slow and deliberate. He reached out, taking her hands in his touch warm and steady. "I've wondered, Ava," he said quietly. "I've wondered what life would have been like if I hadn't been forced to leave my family, if I hadn't lost everything. But I know this. What we have now, what we've built, is real. And that's all that matters. You and I, we're not bound by anyone's expectations. We're not part of that world anymore. This life, this small hut by the river, it's ours. And I wouldn't trade it for anything." Tears welled up in Ava's eyes as she looked at Marcus. His words, his unwavering belief in her, in them, made her realize that she didn't have to carry the weight of the past anymore. She didn't have to prove anything to anyone. Not to the villagers, not to Mrs. Grace, and certainly not to herself. Over the following days, Ava began to let go of the shame that had clung to her like a second skin. She stopped hiding from the village's gossip, stopped pretending that their opinions didn't matter. With each passing day, she realized that the only thing that truly mattered was her life with Marcus. He was the man who had shown her what true strength looked like. Not the strength of wealth or power, but the strength of character, the kind that endured hardship and still found love. As the seasons changed, so too did their life together. The garden Marcus had planted flourished, and they had enough to eat through the winter. The small hut that had once felt like a prison now felt like a home, warm, cozy, and full of life. Marcus's kindness continued to shine through in every aspect of their daily life, and Ava found herself falling deeper in love with him, not just for the man he was, but for the way he had taught her to live without fear. But even as Ava's heart grew lighter, she could not forget the truth about Marcus. He had been forced to leave his past behind, to live in the shadows of a life he had once known. He had given up everything, his family, his fortune, so that he could find someone who loved him for who he truly was, not for what he had. And as the months went by, Ava knew that Marcus was hiding something more, something deeper, something that, when revealed, would change everything. One crisp evening, as Ava and Marcus sat by the fire, he finally spoke the words that had been on his mind for so long. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. Ava looked up, her heart skipping a beat. She had known this moment was coming. She had known that Marcus, the man she loved, the man who had brought her into the light, was hiding something from her. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady, though her pulse quickened. Marcus took a deep breath, his hands shaking slightly as he reached for hers. "I didn't just lose my ability to walk, Ava," he said softly. "I lost my family because I chose a different path. And now, I have to choose again." Ava's heart fluttered in her chest. She didn't know what he meant, but she could feel that something was about to change. "Choose what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus met her gaze, his eyes filled with determination. "I choose you, Ava. I choose this life, this love. I'm ready to start over. I'm ready to live the life we've been building, without fear of the past, without looking over my shoulder." Ava felt a surge of emotion rush through her. For the first time, she truly understood. Marcus had chosen her, not because of her beauty, not because of her past, but because he saw in her the same strength that he had found within himself. Together, they had the power to create a new future, one that wasn't bound by the weight of their histories. As the fire crackled and the night deepened, Ava and Marcus held each other, knowing that they were ready for whatever the future held. Together, they would face it, not as victims of their pasts, but as two souls who had found their way to each other and who would never let go. The days seemed to stretch endlessly before Ava and Marcus as they settled into their new life together. With each passing morning, the weight of their pasts became lighter, though neither of them could ever fully forget the scars they carried. For Ava, the memory of being cast aside by her adoptive family still haunted her, but it was no longer the defining force in her life. She had found something far more valuable, a love that was real, a love that was earned through patience, understanding, and shared hardship. For Marcus, the pain of losing his family and the life he had once known still lingered in his heart. But he had come to understand that true wealth wasn't in gold or land. It was in the bonds he had formed, the quiet strength he had found within himself, and the woman sitting across from him each night by the fire. But even as they learned to embrace the quiet joys of their life together, there was an undeniable sense of change in the air. Something was shifting, something neither of them could ignore. Ava could feel it, the way Marcus sometimes grew distant, the way his eyes would darken when the subject of his past came up. It was as if there were pieces of him still hidden, locked away from her, and it made her wonder how much she really knew about the man she loved. One evening, as the autumn wind howled outside their small home, Marcus came to her with a look in his eyes that Ava had never seen before. It was a look of resolve, of finality, and it made her heart skip a beat. "Ava," Marcus began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "There's something I need to share with you, something I've been keeping from you." Ava's breath caught in her throat. She had known this moment was coming, but that didn't make it any easier to face. The fear that had been bubbling beneath the surface for so long now rose to the forefront. She had always trusted Marcus, had believed in the love they shared, but there was always that lingering doubt, the feeling that there was still a part of him that she didn't fully know. "I know what you're thinking," Marcus continued, his eyes locking onto hers, "and I understand if you're angry, but I want you to know that everything I've done for you, for us." Ava stood, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to steady herself. "What are you talking about, Marcus? What have you been hiding?" Marcus took a deep breath, walking slowly toward her. "I haven't been completely honest about who I am, Ava. I'm not just the poor fisherman you married. I never wanted you to see me as someone who had everything. But the truth is, I've been hiding something I should have told you long ago." Ava felt her chest tighten, her heart racing. She could see the pain in his eyes, the regret that clung to every word he spoke. "What is it, Marcus?" she whispered, her voice breaking with the weight of the unknown. Marcus paused for a moment, his gaze drifting to the floor, as if gathering the strength to reveal the truth. Then, in a voice that seemed to carry the weight of years of secrecy, he spoke the words that would change everything. "I am not just a fisherman, Ava. I am the heir to one of the wealthiest families in the region. My father is a powerful man, one of the wealthiest merchants in the land. But after my accident, he cast me aside. He made it clear that I was no longer of any use to him. The shame of being crippled, the loss of my status, it all led me to walk away from everything." Ava's mind raced, her pulse quickening. She had always known there was something more to Marcus. But this was beyond anything she had imagined. "You're telling me you're rich?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if the very idea of it was too surreal to comprehend. Marcus nodded slowly, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Yes, but I didn't want to live in that world anymore, Ava. I didn't want to be the man my family wanted me to be. I wanted to know who would love me for who I truly am, not for my wealth. So I chose this life. A simple life. I chose you." Ava's mind swirled with the implications of what Marcus had just confessed. Everything she had thought she knew about him, everything she had believed, was suddenly called into question. For hours, the two of them sat in silence, the weight of Marcus's revelation hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Ava's heart was heavy, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. She had married Marcus believing he was just a poor, struggling man who had been dealt a cruel hand by life. But now, everything had changed. "I don't know what to think," Ava finally said, her voice shaking. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why keep this from me?" "I was afraid," Marcus admitted, his voice low, as if confessing a sin. "I didn't want you to see me as a man with everything. I didn't want you to think that you were just another prize to be won, that I was using my wealth to get your love. I wanted you to love me for who I am, not for what I have." Ava's chest tightened as she listened to his words. She had never expected this. She had never imagined that the man she had married, the man who had shown her nothing but kindness and generosity, was hiding such a monumental secret. But even in the midst of the confusion, Ava couldn't deny the truth that was now clear to her. She had come to love Marcus for his heart, for the way he had cared for her, for the way he had treated her with respect when no one else had. His wealth didn't change that. It didn't change the way she felt about him. "Marcus," Ava said softly, her voice trembling, "I don't know how to process this, but I do know one thing. You didn't have to hide who you were. I love you for who you are, wealth or no wealth, but I need to know something. If you're really this powerful, if you have all this wealth, why are you still here? Why are we living like this?" Marcus's eyes softened as he looked at her. "Because, Ava, this is what I chose. I chose a life with you. I chose a life of honesty, of love, and of being true to who I am. The world I came from, it's not a place I belong anymore. You and I, we've created something here. And that's more valuable to me than anything my family could give me." Ava looked at Marcus, her heart swelling with a mixture of love and relief. The man standing before her was not defined by his wealth or status. He was defined by the choices he had made, by the love he had given her, and by the quiet strength that had carried them both through the toughest of times. As the days passed, Ava and Marcus slowly began to heal from the shock of the truth. The village's judgment still lingered, but it no longer had the power to control them. Ava understood now that their love was not based on the opinions of others, nor was it built on the foundation of Marcus's wealth or his past. It was built on trust, on mutual respect, and on a shared journey of growth. One evening, as the sky turned a brilliant orange, Ava stood outside their hut, looking out at the river. Marcus stood beside her, his arm around her waist, offering her comfort in his familiar, steady presence. "I know it's been hard," Marcus said softly, "but we've made it this far, Ava. And no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you." Ava turned to him, her heart full of gratitude and love. "I know, Marcus. And I'll be here for you too, no matter what." With that, they stood together, watching the sunset as the world around them grew quiet. The journey ahead was uncertain, but together, they were ready for whatever came next. As the days grew colder and the wind began to carry the scent of winter, Ava and Marcus's life together in the small hut by the river had transformed into something beautiful. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was theirs. In the quiet solitude of their home, they had found peace. In the face of all the uncertainty, the secrets, and the judgments from the world outside, they had built a life based on something deeper, something that no wealth or status could provide. True companionship, trust, and a love that had withstood the test of time and hardship. But even as Ava began to embrace the life they had chosen, there was a new sense of anticipation in the air. There were still questions left unanswered. Despite all the progress they had made together, Ava knew that there was still more to uncover about Marcus's past, about the family he had left behind, the life he had once known, and the choices that had led him to where he was now. One crisp evening, as the last rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, Ava found herself staring out the window of their hut, deep in thought. She had grown accustomed to the rhythm of their life together, the long days spent working side by side, the quiet nights by the fire. But there was something more, something calling to her from the past. She had to know the whole truth, not just the pieces Marcus had shared with her. But before she could find the courage to ask more questions, the door creaked open and Marcus stepped inside, his face unusually serious. His eyes, usually warm and steady, were now shadowed with something she couldn't quite place. "Ava," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion, "I received a letter today. From my family." Ava's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this. After all this time, after everything that had happened, she hadn't imagined Marcus would ever hear from his family again. She turned to face him, her eyes wide. "What did they say? What do they want?" Marcus's expression was a mixture of regret and uncertainty. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he slowly walked over to the small table by the fire and opened the letter. Ava followed him, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't help but wonder what was inside. Was it an apology? A plea for reconciliation? Or something else entirely? As Marcus unfolded the letter, he hesitated for a moment before reading it aloud, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. Dear Marcus, we know it has been many years since we last spoke, and we understand the distance that has grown between us. Your mother and I have been concerned for you, and we wish to mend the rift that has kept us apart. Our family is not complete without you, and your presence is missed deeply. We know the pain you have suffered, but we hope you can forgive us for our mistakes. We would like to offer you a place in the family once more, and we hope you will return to us. There is much that remains unresolved, and we believe that with time, we can rebuild what was lost. Please, Marcus, come home. With love, your family. Ava's heart ached as she listened to Marcus read the words. She had no idea what he was feeling in that moment, whether he was angry, relieved, or even confused. The letter was an invitation, yes, but it was also a reminder of everything Marcus had left behind. His family had cast him aside, treated him as if he were worthless. And now, after all this time, they wanted him back. Marcus folded the letter carefully, his hands trembling slightly. Ava watched him, her heart going out to him. She could see the conflict in his eyes, the pull of family, the longing for acceptance, but also the deep scars that remained from their rejection. You don't have to go back, Ava said softly, walking toward him. You don't owe them anything. Marcus didn't speak at first. Instead, he ran a hand through his hair, as if trying to make sense of his thoughts. Finally, he looked at her, his expression one of quiet determination. I don't know, Ava, he said quietly. I've been carrying this burden for so long. The rejection, the anger. I thought that if I could prove myself by building a life here with you, I could finally escape that pain. But now, this letter, it changes everything. I've always wondered if I made the right choice. Maybe it's time I face them. Time to finally let go of the past. Ava's heart broke for him. She could see the internal struggle he was going through. He had spent years building a life apart from his family, a life where he had come to terms with his worth. But now, the invitation to return to the family that had once turned their backs on him threatened to unravel everything he had built. I can't tell you what to do, Ava said, her voice filled with compassion. But know this, what we have here, what we've built, is enough. You are enough, Marcus. Don't let anyone, your family, the villagers, make you question that. That night, after a long conversation filled with doubt, fear, and uncertainty, Marcus made his decision. He wouldn't return to his family, not yet at least. The past was painful, yes, but he had found something more important now, the life he had with Ava. He had learned that family wasn't just about blood. It was about the people who truly saw you, who loved you for who you were, not for what you had. The next morning, as the sun rose over the river, Ava and Marcus stood together outside their hut. The cold morning air brushed against their faces, but it didn't matter. They were standing side by side, as they had been since the beginning. Marcus turned to Ava, his eyes filled with gratitude. I've made my decision, he said. I'm not going back, not yet. I have you, and that's enough for me. Ava smiled, her heart swelling with pride. And I have you, she whispered. That's all I need. With that, they embraced, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. From that day forward, Ava and Marcus continued to live their simple yet fulfilling life. They worked side by side, tending to their small garden, sharing their dreams, and building a future together. The village still whispered, But Ava no longer cared. She had Marcus, and that was enough. They had both learned that life wasn't about wealth, status, or the expectations of others. It was about love, the love they shared, the love that had been tested, and the love that had ultimately led them to where they were meant to be. And so, as the seasons changed and the years passed, Ava and Marcus continued to walk the road together, stronger, wiser, and more in love than ever before. They had faced the ghosts of their pasts, and now, with the future before them, they knew one thing for certain. Love was all they needed to keep moving forward. Life in the small, humble hut by the river had become more than just survival for Ava and Marcus. It had become a sanctuary, a place where they had learned to truly live again. After all the pain, the betrayal, and the weight of their pasts, they had found something beautiful in each other. A love that didn't require grand gestures or riches, but simply the quiet understanding of two souls who had suffered and healed together. And now, as the seasons shifted once more, they found themselves on the cusp of a new chapter, a chapter that would test everything they had built. For months, Ava had noticed small changes in Marcus. He had grown quieter at times, lost in thought, and occasionally distant when the subject of his family came up. It wasn't that he had stopped loving her, but the old scars were there, buried deep beneath the surface. It was the unresolved tension with his family, the lingering question of whether he had truly made the right choice when he left everything behind. But Ava had always been there for him, offering her unwavering support, just as he had done for her. But now, the time had come for them to face something they had both been avoiding. Something that would either strengthen their bond or test it in ways they couldn't predict. It was an ordinary evening when the knock came. Marcus and Ava were sitting by the fire, talking softly about their plans for the coming harvest, when they heard the faint sound of footsteps outside. It was strange. No one ever visited them here, so far from the village, and the last time anyone had come to their door had been months ago. Marcus stood, his instincts sharp as ever, and approached the door cautiously. When he opened it, he was greeted by the sight of a man standing in the dimming light of the evening, a figure Ava had never seen before. The man was tall, his clothes fine but worn, his posture regal, and his eyes sharp with an intelligence that immediately put Ava on edge. He looked like someone from Marcus's past, someone who belonged to the world Marcus had chosen to leave behind. "I'm sorry to intrude," the man said, his voice smooth but edged with purpose. "But I need to speak with Marcus." Ava looked at Marcus, her heart racing. She could see the tension in his face as he stepped forward, clearly recognizing the man standing on their doorstep. He didn't speak right away, as if trying to decide whether to invite the stranger in. "I knew it would come to this," Marcus muttered under his breath, almost to himself. He looked at Ava with a sigh, his face filled with both reluctance and resignation. "This is someone from my past." The man gave a slight nod, his eyes never leaving Marcus. "I'm Jonathan," he said, extending his hand to Marcus, though his posture remained stiff. "Your brother sent me. We need to talk." Ava watched as Marcus's face fell, his expression hardening as the name Jonathan echoed in the room. She could see the unease in his eyes, the deep well of emotions that was suddenly being stirred. She had learned much about Marcus's past, but there were still parts of it that remained shrouded in mystery. Now she knew that whatever was about to unfold would bring those hidden pieces into the light. "Why are you here?" Marcus finally asked, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of something far darker. "Did Father send you?" Jonathan's lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes momentarily flickering with something close to guilt. "Your father is ill, Marcus," he said quietly. "He wants to see you. It's time to come home." Ava felt the air in the room thicken with tension. She watched as Marcus's shoulders stiffened, his jaw tightening. She could see the internal battle playing out before her eyes. The part of him that had chosen to walk away from the world of wealth and power and the part that still longed for some form of closure, some resolution to the years of rejection and pain. Marcus shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "You want me to go back to that place? After everything they've done? After how they treated me?" Jonathan's gaze softened, just for a moment, but then his expression hardened again. "Your father is a man of pride, Marcus. He may have cast you aside, but he's not the same man he was. This is your chance to rebuild what was lost. He's asking for you, not as a son, but as a man." The words hung in the air like a challenge, daring Marcus to make a decision he wasn't ready for. Ava could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. She didn't know the whole story. She didn't know the full extent of the hurt that Marcus had endured, but she could see it in his eyes now. The past had never truly been gone. It was always there, lurking in the background, waiting to rear its head when they least expected it. Marcus turned to Ava, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "I don't know if I can do this, Ava. I don't know if I can go back." Ava stepped forward, her heart swelling with both concern and love for the man who had shown her so much kindness. She had learned to love Marcus for who he was, his quiet strength, his tenderness, and his unwavering loyalty to her. She knew that whatever decision he made now, it would shape their future. But she also knew that Marcus was stronger than the pain of his past. "You don't have to go back, Marcus," Ava said softly, taking his hand in hers. "But you do need to decide what you want. For us, for you. No one can make that choice for you. But whatever you decide, I'm here. I will be here with you." Marcus looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude and love. It was a love that had grown stronger with each passing day, a love that had become their foundation. She had never expected that the man she had married out of necessity would become the one person who understood her heart like no one else. Now, he was standing at a crossroads, and she was determined to support him, no matter the path he chose. "I don't want to lose you, Ava," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I also can't keep running from my past. I've spent so long trying to escape it, and I'm not sure I can anymore." Ava's heart ached for him, but she knew that Marcus's journey wasn't about escaping the past. It was about making peace with it. And with her by his side, he could face whatever came next. "Then go, Marcus," Ava said, her voice firm but gentle. "But remember, I'll be here waiting. You don't have to do this alone." After a long, quiet pause, Marcus turned to Jonathan. "I'll come with you," he said, his voice filled with a newfound determination. "But not for them. For me, and for the life I've built here." Jonathan nodded, a glimmer of respect in his eyes. "That's all we can ask, Marcus." With one last look at Ava, Marcus stepped forward, his shoulders squared, ready to face the future. It was a future that was uncertain, filled with the unknowns of a family he had once left behind, but also a future that held the promise of healing, redemption, and perhaps even reconciliation. The morning after Jonathan's visit, Marcus and Ava journeyed back to the city, where Marcus's family lived. The journey was heavy with silence, filled with anticipation and the weight of what lay ahead. Marcus had spent years building a life apart from them, but now, faced with the invitation to return, he had to confront the past. When they arrived at the grand mansion, Marcus's mother greeted them. The family estate was everything Marcus had left behind: wealth, power, and cold rejection. His mother, elegant but visibly regretful, confessed that she and his father had cast him aside due to shame and embarrassment over his injury. She apologized for the pain they caused, but Marcus, though still hurt, was determined to move forward. "I didn't come here for validation," Marcus said. "I came here to understand why you abandoned me." His mother, with tears in her eyes, admitted that it was their own shame and inability to cope with his disability that led to his rejection. "I'm sorry, Marcus," she whispered. Marcus paused, feeling the weight of her words. But he realized that the past could not define him anymore. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he replied. "I need to move on." With this emotional confrontation, Marcus found the closure he needed. The past no longer held him captive. As they left the family estate, Ava stood by his side, having witnessed his journey of self-liberation. They were no longer weighed down by the ghosts of Marcus's past. Back at their home by the river, Marcus felt lighter, and so did Ava. The weight of the past was behind them, and their future, built on love, trust, and understanding, was just beginning. As Marcus and Ava stood together, looking out at the calm river, a sense of peace settled over them. They had faced the past with all its painful memories and unresolved questions, and had come out stronger on the other side. Their love had been tested, but it had not faltered. In the end, they had found what mattered most: each other. Marcus knew the journey ahead would not always be easy, but with Ava by his side, the love and support they shared, he was ready for whatever came next. They had built a life filled with hope, and together, they would continue to walk the path of love, forgiveness, and new beginnings. The sun was setting, painting the sky with vibrant shades of orange and pink. As the evening breeze swept over them, they shared a quiet moment of contentment, knowing that they had finally found what they had been searching for all along: peace, love, and a future that was entirely their own. What do you think of Marcus and Ava's journey? Was it the love story you expected? How did you feel when Marcus finally found closure with his family? Do you believe true love can heal even the deepest wounds? If you enjoyed this story, we would love to hear your thoughts. Please rate this video from 1 to 10 in the comments below. What did you love, and what could have been better? Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more heartfelt stories like this one. Your support means the world to us. Thanks for watching.